Okay, here we go. Did I just fart? Did someone else just fart? Well, actually, I did fart, but I did it as a teaching device, and I'll explain why farting is key to defining social deviance. And that's what this video is all about. It's all about social deviance. It's not all about farting. Well, I suppose you could kind of make your own minds up about that. So what is social deviance? Well, the technical definition in relation to how it's studied in sociology is it's a thing that refers to behaviours that violate social norms and social rules. But it's a little more complicated than that, because there are broadly two different types of violation. The first is the violation of formally enacted rules. The second is the violation of informal social rules. So the first one, the violation of formally enacted rules, social rules, is where we have deviant behaviour, which we commonly refer to as criminal behaviour. We're not going to focus on that so much in this unit, but occasionally we may find ourselves in that space, and I'll explain why in just a second. But let us start with the violation of informal social rules. These refer to breaking social rules that are not formally constituted in law. You know, they are rules that refer to our expectations as to what is normal and acceptable behaviour. These are also known as social norms, but these informal rules and norms have never been codified into law. Rather, they're part of our broader culture. We learn about these rules and norms during our early socialisation, during our childhood, but if later in life we travel to a different country that has a different culture, we learn new rules and new norms. And that can be quite tough. And it's a thing we call culture shock. Now, sometimes rules and norms are specific to particular subcultures, like a particular profession, or to a particular sport, or to a particular social activity.
So, what are the rules of this sport?
Now, that's a signal that social rules and norms are socially and culturally dependent. So don't bother looking for rules and norms that apply to all people in all places at all times, because you won't find them. And if you do find them, you found them because you're wearing cultural blinkers. Okay, they're an illusion. We don't have universal norms and universal rules. They are always contextualized into local settings in a particular time, a particular place, with a particular group of people. Now let's start with a couple of trivial rules. So farting and burping. Now, when you do either in public, and particularly if you do one of these when you're in an elevator or in close proximity to others, you'll commonly get some sort of reprisal. You know, it's usually no more than a dirty look. And often we internalize the reprisal by feeling embarrassed or feeling ashamed, even if no one shows any sign of noticing that we'd just done something quite rude. Now, those responses of others and of our own are what regulates our behaviour. You know, we don't fart in a lift again because we remember how socially uncomfortable the experience was. Now, another violation of a social rule and a norm is picking your nose in public. You know, you might not get a few, you just get a few dirty looks off people. You're not going to get arrested for picking your nose. Basically, what you risk is embarrassment and being viewed as a rather unattractive individual. But even trivial rules, when you break them, can get you into trouble. And we'll talk a bit about that in our presentation on rule breaking. And I've got a little activity for you where I'm going to ask you to break a trivial rule, but I'm going to ask you to be very careful about breaking that particular trivial rule that I'm going to set, because people can get really upset with us when we break that particular rule. Anyway, I've said too much. Wait for the activity. Okay. Social and cultural context is key here. And globally, we don't live in a monoculture. But globalization is starting to blur some cultures in some ways, but we still live in a world with many different distinctive cultural groupings. So if you're someone like me, a Brit, who emigrated to Australia thinking there would be some cultural familiarity between Australia and Britain, you get a shock.
If you call crisps chips, what do you call chips?
Chips. Hot chips.
There are many differences between British and Australian culture, and I'm still learning about it 10 years after arriving here. Is it 10 years? No, it's not. What am I doing? It feels like 10. It's about 8. Whatever. Who's counting? Immigration department now. Anyway, these differences are more so between a country like Australia or a country like UK and, say, Asian cultures. Anyway, let's get back to burping and farting. Now, burping out loud at a meal in Australia is usually embarrassing if you're with strangers. You know, they'll usually give you a dirty look. If you're with friends, they might laugh because they're embarrassed and they'll laugh out loud rather than giving you a reprimand. But whatever the response you get...
Did you hear that?
You'll receive some sort of sanction. You know, you'll get the message that you're an unattractive human being right now. You shouldn't be doing that. But if you burp at the dinner table in some countries in South Asia,
the food not to your liking?
You'll be warmly appreciated because it's often seen as a compliment that's being paid to the host. You're indicating that you've enjoyed the food and you're now fully satiated. Same goes for farting. You know, if you fart at the dinner table in some parts of Asia, it's often, but not always, seen as a sign of appreciation. So burping and farting, quite trivial, but they are culturally contextualized. It means different things in different places. So they're trivial, but trivial things can be viewed very seriously in some cultures. In this unit, we're deliberately going to focus on those kind of non-trivial rule breaking, you know, the non-trivial deviance. As such, we might occasionally find ourselves talking about those violations of formally enacted rules. That's why I said that whilst we're not going to focus on the breaking of formally inscribed rules where people are breaking the law, occasionally we may find ourselves in that space. We may end up talking about things that are criminally deviant. And that's because laws are constantly changing. Things that were once criminal are now no longer criminal. And things that were not criminal in the past are now criminal. Now, an example of a behaviour that was once deemed criminal but is now not criminal is homosexuality. In the not-so-distant past, it was viewed as criminal behaviour because it was against the law to be in a homosexual relationship. The first Australian state to change that was South Australia, where homosexuality was decriminalised in 1975. That was followed by the ACT in 1976, Victoria in 1980, Northern Territory 1983, New South Wales 1984, Western Australia decriminalised homosexuality in 1989, Queensland 1990, getting a bit late to the party, and Tasmania, oh you Tasmanians, what the hell were you doing, didn't decriminalise homosexuality until 1997. Yeah, 1997. You know, homosexuality was still a crime in Tasmania up until 1997. If you're in your 20s, maybe that sounds a long time ago. You know, it's maybe before you were born for some people. But for those of us who are a bit older, it's a frighteningly recent thing. So the law is constantly changing. In fact, the law is constantly evolving in relation to sexuality. Recently, it's been heading in the right direction, offering gay people more rights and protections. Things are still changing, but there's no guarantee that laws won't start heading off in the wrong direction. So the lesson to learn here is that history is important in all of this. But when I say it's not criminal to be gay anymore, well, it still is criminal to be gay in some countries. So culture is also important here. In Singapore, for example, it's still illegal to be in a gay relationship. In countries like that, we see the enduring legacy of colonization. You know, it's the legacy of my mob, the British. You know, we made it illegal, and we made it illegal in all the colonies as well. In Singapore, it's not a major crime. It's not usual that it would attract a prison sentence. If it does attract a prison sentence, it's no more than 2 years. I mean, 2 years is still pretty severe, but you know, it's not right up there in terms of murder and rape and so on. But in other countries, it attracts the death penalty. So countries like Afghanistan, Brunei, Iran, Mauritania, Nigeria, Pakistan, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Somalia, Sudan, and the United Arab Emirates and Yemen. They all prescribe the death penalty for homosexuality. So it's not just history, it's culture. We have to understand these formal laws, these formal rules and rule breaking in a historical and a cultural context. Sometimes these formal laws, the formal rules which are inscribed in law, suddenly become legal, and then they shift into informal rules. How about things that used to be legal but are now illegal? Well, smoking in public, space in public spaces like buses, airplanes, trains, restaurants, and so on. That's now gone from being legal to now illegal. But with COVID-19, we've been given a really interesting moment in time, and we're living through a time that sociologists will probably talk about for many years to come. Presuming, of course, that our species survives the virus and then survives the climate catastrophe that's going to follow. Presuming we survive long enough to be part of a history that people talk about in the future, then those sociologists are going to talk about the time we're living in now as one of the most fascinating times they've ever come across. Going for a walk and having a sit in the park was essentially criminalised during lockdown, in the sense that if you did it, the police could ask you to stop doing it, and if you didn't stop doing it, they could issue you with a fine. But then it was made normal again, and it was okay to do it. And then in parts of Melbourne, the time I'm recording this, they had a second wave of COVID-19, and things like going to the park to have a sit on the bench became criminalised again in certain suburbs.
More than 300,000 Australians are preparing for a second round of lockdown this morning. Residents in 36 Melbourne suburbs have been ordered to stay at home as the city grapples with a coronavirus outbreak across its north and west.
So what we're getting is a rare glimpse of the sort of shifts that usually happen in relation to social rules, that usually happen over decades, but right now it's kind of happening over weeks and months. It's because of these public health orders that are coming in that become, in a sense, new temporary laws that everyone has to follow. Now, here is your next activity. This is an activity I want you to do. It relates to those crazy laws from the past that, because of a quirk in political processes, have remained on the statute books of certain countries. Laws that were never repealed because legislators never got around to repealing them, but no longer really make sense. Now, these laws that were, one would presume that they were made for some good reasons, to responding to something that was happening at the time, now look utterly stupid because the social context has shifted and we can't see that social context anymore. We've lost sight of that social context, and those laws no longer make sense to us. In fact, they look bonkers because we've lost our understanding of the specific social context or social events that led to the laws being made. To make a behaviour deviant and then to take sanctions out against the behaviour. Now, we'll just briefly go back to farting. I told you this was going to be a video about farting. Oh no, it's a video about social deviance, which contains some reference to farting. But going back to farting, you're going to think I'm obsessed with farting. I'm doing nothing to dismantle the stereotype about British humour. We're a bit scatological. Anyway, back to farting. Did you know that in Florida, it's still illegal to pass wind in public after 6 p.m. on a Thursday? So I mean, no one's going to get prosecuted for doing it, but it's still illegal to do it. It's just because at some point they felt the need to have that law on the statute books in Florida. No longer applies, now looks really silly, but the law's still there. So what I want you to do is, go into your favourite search engine, Google or whatever, and have a look for some of these crazy laws. I want you to share them so we can all have a giggle. And post them up on our discussion board. I'll create a little topic area for us called bonkers laws or crazy laws. So have a look for them, post the ones you find, and give us all a giggle. Also up on the Moodle site under week 1, I've put a link to a little quiz you can take where you get presented with various crazy laws and you have to decide which crazy laws are real and which crazy laws are made up. And it's not that easy, I tell you, because occasionally people go really crazy when they make laws. But it's all a bit of fun for us. Anyway, we're allowed to have a bit of fun on this unit. So, we've now got a decent sociological definition of deviance. It describes actions or behaviours that violate informal social norms or formally enacted social norms. Now, in the next presentation, we're going to explore that concept of social norms and deviance in a bit more detail. So, till then, ta-da. Did someone just fart again?